Bye, Anthony. Well, welcome to Jefferson United Methodist Church. Welcome to this special evening. I know that we've got a lot of very informative, important information coming your way. I want to let you know, if you've not been here before, if you need the restrooms, you can find them down the hall, and they're to your left. If you need anything, just wave, and I'll do my best to take care of that. But let us begin with prayer. Good and gracious God, we thank you so much for this time to be together, this time to learn about your world, God. We pray for Parker as she brings this information to us. We pray, God, that we will allow it to enter into our minds, and we will use it in ways that you would have us to grow and to change and to transform. God, we thank you for all of those who work so diligently to take care of those who are vulnerable, who are on the margins, who are in danger. For God, we know that you are there with them. God, we love you so much. We welcome your Holy Spirit here. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I'll turn it over to Beverly.
We're so excited to have everybody here tonight, and wanted to tell you a little bit about one of the reasons that Parker is here. First of all, I know her well because she was my first grandchild, and I'm so dearly proud of her. I am blessed to be a part of a small group of women who meet on Tuesdays, and we recently, last year and this year, have been studying a book. Did I say Tuesdays? Wednesdays. At 2 o'clock, excuse me. Yes. And we're called Gals Seeking Grace, and I need grace. Anyway, we were doing a study on the women of the Bible, and we were studying Mary of Bethany. And Mary has a sister named Martha. I'm sure y'all know the story about them. Well, Mary decided that she was going to give Jesus a special gift. And she broke expensive perfume, put it on his body. And a lot of people were very upset with her, saying that she was being wasteful and that could have done so much good in other ways. But Jesus said to Mary, "Please do not fuss with her. She did what she could." So in Bible study, we discussed there are so many things going on in this world that we can't do anything about, or we think we can't do anything about. Do what we can. And we had prayed for Parker, and the ladies in the group knew about Parker. And we decided that we would maybe just put a little dent in human trafficking and invite Parker to come and speak. So I hope that she will touch your hearts, and that maybe in some kind of way the words that she says will make a difference in the future, or you will just be quickened when you see something that maybe is not right. I'm convinced that it's going to make a difference. She had this passion, and I was like, "Parker, are you sure this is what you want to do in college?" And it continued, and now I know why. So I'm very proud of her.
Thanks. That's kind of you. So Gaga's my Gaga, or Beverly's my Gaga, my grandma, and Kim's my mom, and Lee Barnes, if any of you guys know, when he was around these parts, he's my dad. So there's a couple of dots, but my name is Parker, and I work for an agency called One More Child, and I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of what we're going to do. I'm going to really quickly tell you about who One More Child is. And then we're going to talk about human trafficking, and then we're going to talk about online safety, and then we're going to talk about ways that people are tangibly serving people that are survivors of lots of different victimizations and talk about what is happening in your county and how you can serve the people in your county. So that's kind of a zoom out of what this time is going to look like. I will have time, pending time, like for questions and all that sort of fun stuff at the end, because all that is really important. So you can go on to the next slide. So I shared with you that I work for an agency called One More Child. The huge zoom out is that One More Child has a long history of serving vulnerable children and struggling families, over 125 years, specifically starting in serving foster children, opening orphanages when we did that sort of thing in the United States that we don't do anymore for a lot of really good reasons. And as One More Child was serving children and families that were affected by the foster care system, there were a couple of common threads that were seen. There were a couple of vulnerabilities or risk factors or some language that we would see that we started seeing in a lot of these children and families that were involved in these complex systems. One was that they were hungry, that they didn't have enough food to eat. A lot of these children were raised by single moms. They were raised by families that wanted to care for their children and didn't know how because no one ever taught them. And a lot of them were also affected by the juvenile justice system or the justice system at large. And then many had been affected by human trafficking, sexual exploitation, or sexual injustice. And so in an effort to do some prevention work, essentially, of like, how do we prevent children and families from getting involved in these complex systems? How do we serve them before, during, and after? That is how anti-trafficking became part of the story of One More Child. You can go ahead to the next slide. So before I kind of get into the nitty gritty, I mean, you have seen the flyer for this event. Like, we are going to be talking about human trafficking. We're going to talk about sex trafficking. There's going to be some pieces around sexual trauma and assault. There will be no videos or anything that is explicit, but this is hard. Like, this is a hard thing to talk about. That doesn't mean we're scared to talk about it. My excitement for the ways that I am talking about this is not because I am excited about the, I mean, I do this thing all the time, right? Where, you say, what do you do? I work in human trafficking. And then you're like, no, I don't. Like, I work in anti-trafficking. So, but this is your permission slip that if you need to step out, if you need to throw some water on your face, if you need to leave and not come back, you're not going to hurt anybody's feelings. Like, you need to take care of yourself and your family and whatever that looks like. Okay, so I shared with you that one of the main pillars at One More Child is anti-trafficking. That's kind of the language that we use, that you'll hear me use, is anti-trafficking. Some people would say counter-trafficking, but it's essentially going against this industry of human trafficking. So this is just a little bit of information about what we do. So we provide direct services to survivors of human trafficking in really tangible ways that I'll get to closer to the end. But then also do a lot of things like this through education and awareness and prevention for professionals that are in the field, that are meeting with vulnerable people and need to know what red flags and warning signs are, to first responders that we know are working with vulnerable people, and also members of the community as we're educating in general. Go ahead. So now I'm going to ground us in kind of like, what is human trafficking? So the media and movies have kind of done a number on what human trafficking actually is, that there is a lot of imagery and things to that extent around children and adults, like getting kidnapped or being chained to things. We'll get into that a little bit more, but we're going to ground ourselves in the reality of what human trafficking actually is in the United States, in North Carolina, and not necessarily what we are seeing on the news or mass production. Go ahead. So this is a lot of words for what human trafficking is. So you will hear me use like two words kind of interchangeably. I'll talk about human trafficking and sex trafficking, and then I'll also talk about sexual exploitation. So sexual exploitation is essentially the all-encompassing word of that like type of sexual harm. Whereas human trafficking is a little bit more of a legal word, and lawyers are going to use human trafficking and they're going to charge human trafficking. Sexual exploitation is a little bit lower barrier. So I'm going to use those words interchangeably, so that will just help us. So we know in the United States that we have only had a legal definition for human trafficking since 2000. So before this definition, any type of sex in exchange for something of value, whether that is money, a safe place to stay, food, housing, etc., that was all considered prostitution, which is illegal in the United States. It now, because of this definition from 2000, we believe in the United States that there is no such thing as child prostitution, that a child cannot consent to sexual exploitation, that is the adult's responsibility. And so anybody under the age of 18 that is exchanging sex for something of value, not necessarily money, but we're talking about housing, we're talking about food, all that sort of thing, that is considered human trafficking by our legal definition. The other part of that legal definition, when we're talking about adults, there have to be a couple of factors that meet that legal definition, and those factors are force, fraud, or coercion. We're not going to spend a terrible amount of time talking about that because I'm not a lawyer, and I am more concerned about harm caused and less concerned about whether someone meets a legal definition. I am audacious in believing that very, very few people, if anybody, woke up one day and decided they wanted to sell their body for money. And so even if that was a learned behavior, I still think that there is harm that can be done and has been done that needs education and healing around that. So I'm focusing a lot around sexual exploitation, sex trafficking. It's important to know that there's another part of this conversation regarding labor trafficking. So that's that force, fraud, or coercion with labor involved. And so when an individual is not getting properly compensated in the way that they were paid. That is not my area of expertise, in full transparency. More my world is sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. So, but that is an important part of the legal definition. Go to the next slide. So a couple of fast facts of things that we know about human trafficking that are important to some of our conversation today. So we know that the human trafficking criminal enterprise is a gigantically growing enterprise, and we'll talk about some of the reasons of that a little bit later on. And we know it's only second to the drug trafficking for dollars generated. Now, this is illegal, and so it's terribly hard to track. And so all of these statistics that we do, we know in full transparency are probably not accurate, because it's kind of backwards in this type of work, because having the statistics is actually good because that means things are being reported. And so it's a really funky situation. Emily, thanks for your head nod in the back. She's agreeing with me. So it is a hard thing to navigate in regards to numbers. But we do know it is growing. We do know that the amount of money that is being generated is a whole bunch. And it draws our attention. Now, some for our conversation today that's very important is we know that the common age of recruitment, so when someone would get involved in human trafficking or sexual exploitation, we know the common age of recruitment is between the ages of 12 and 14. And so us grown-ups have a responsibility to protect children. And so we're going to talk about some ways that we can tangibly do that, knowing what that common age of recruitment is. Go ahead. So this is just a little bit about North Carolina. When I shared the history of One More Child, I think I failed to mention that most of One More Child services are in the state of Florida, and we are relatively new, like 4 years have been in North Carolina. And I've worked in a couple of different states, lived in Georgia for a little while, lived in Florida for a little while, and then moved back to North Carolina, which is home, to learn a little bit of, and so it's been interesting to learn about the North Carolina anti-trafficking landscape. I graciously say, as a girl who loves her home state, like, we're really, really behind. Like, we're really behind in the service provision that we're offering, honestly, to a lot of victims of crime, to be completely transparent. But in my world especially, we are very behind in how we are serving survivors of human trafficking. So I told you about those numbers. I'm sharing these numbers with you because sometimes it's nice to have numbers to hold on to. Again, an increased number of calls received from the human trafficking hotline is actually considered success because we want people to be reaching out for support. We want people to be getting the support that they deserve. We want the number of cases that are being prosecuted to grow. Again, I know that feels complicated, but we want justice to be happening. One thing that is encouraging, there is an agency called Shared Hope International that does a lot of reporting and policy work throughout the country and kind of gives states a grade in regards to how they are providing services to survivors of human trafficking. And in 2024, we increased our grade from an F to a D. So, I mean, you know, a little bit better. You know, we've still got some ways to go, but there is some progress in the ways that services are being provided, in the ways that we're educating, and some of the language that we're using. Go ahead. So survivors, so I shared with you that the vast majority of the work that I do is directly with survivors of human trafficking. I love doing stuff like this, but where I feel most alive is when I am working directly with a survivor. And so a couple of things that are important for us to know as we are trying to educate ourselves of how to best support survivors is that survivors are not, often not, but really it's fair to say not, going to usually identify as being survivors of human trafficking or identify as survivors of harm. And that's for a lot of different reasons. One is because of shame, right? The shame that is involved. One is because of the way that our culture has normalized sexual exploitation. Some of that is for the other reasons, is that there's a lot of self-blame, a harm for what it means to disclose. If a mother is exploiting or she is with an exploiter to take care of her family, her disclosing is going to mean that that income is away from her family, and so how's she going to take care of her children? So that is going to cause significant harm or fear around how she's going to care for her. Also, a lot of the survivors that I have worked with are in intimate relationships with the people that are exploiting them. So they're in intimate relationships with their traffickers. And we'll talk a little bit on a very vague basis on the cycle of grooming. And we know that most people did not begin their relationship with their abuser or with their trafficker in a transactional nature, that there was a foundation of what felt like love or care or basic needs were being met. And then it transitioned into something else. And so you can imagine that that significantly brings up the fear of self-disclosing because you care about this person. Even though they are harming you, maybe harming other people, and that they're breaking the law, it's still very scary. Also, as I mentioned, prostitution in the United States is illegal. And so for our adult survivors of human trafficking, it is very, very hard to prove in the legal system that something is human trafficking and not prostitution. And so our clients have a fear that they are going to go to jail for prostitution. And we know that that is extremely complex once there is a charge on your record, which further leads to why survivors, for the most part, will not self-identify. And when we're talking about children, I will regularly say it is not the child's job to identify, that is the grown-up's job. A child should not have to disclose the harm that has happened to them or the harm that they are experiencing. It is the grown-up's job that are involved in their life to know enough to care for the child. And then if disclosure does happen, for us to know what the next step is. You can go to the next slide. So I started talking a little bit about what a trafficker is. Again, like this language trafficker is like so charged, and you probably have a picture in your brain of somebody that's really bad and takes advantage of people. And that is true. And it's also very nuanced. And so we know that traffickers are looking for vulnerable people, that they are looking for people that have great need and that need their basic needs met. And so that can look like a 15-year-old that is desiring a father's affection. That can look like a grown adult that is looking for a safe place to live. That can look like another grown adult that is experiencing poverty or other types of complex harm. And so they need a way to continue the life that they have created. We know that a lot of survivors come from really complex family systems. So whether that is their parents had an unhealthy relationship, or perhaps their parents were also involved in trafficking or sexual exploitation. So there is a normalization of unhealth. And so we know that traffickers are looking out for these vulnerabilities. Another important vulnerability for children specifically is individuals that are frequently running away. We know that running away and food and housing, like those things are not for free, and kids don't usually have a ton of money laying around in their pocket. And so children can learn that there are other ways to make money and other ways to have their needs met. Go ahead. Okay, so I talked a little bit about what this stages of grooming thing is in regards to, you guys definitely for sure can't see that, but you can Google it later. It's a very common little situation. But what is important is that usually, of course there are exceptions, but the vast majority of survivors are not being kidnapped from off the street or at a Belk in the mall, that they are entering into these stages of grooming, and it is gradual. It is not a dramatic, suddenly my child was living with me and she didn't come home. Surely that happens, right? Surely that happens. Statistically, that is not what is happening all the time. It's just not. So the stages of grooming are important for us to know. So we talked about what traffickers look for in regards to target. So they would target an individual. They would start to figure out what the needs of that individual are. We started talking about what those some of those needs are. They would be creative in figuring out how to fill those needs. And so suddenly you're a high school teacher and a teenager starts coming in and they have brand new shoes on and they've worn the same dirty shoes all year long. You're like, oh, okay, like that's really interesting. Like, just gonna like tuck that away. That's not necessarily in alignment. Then once those things have been met, then we're gonna start to see some isolation. So see, I'm really the only one that ever really cared for you, right? Like I'm the only one that ever bought you those shoes. I'm the only one that listens to you when you need to be listened to. Then we're gonna see. So you'll see we've already gone through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until abuse is really even entering the picture. And yes, sometimes that abuse looks like sexual abuse or physical abuse. But in my experience, what is more, for lack of a better word, productive, to be frank, is more psychological and emotional abuse of not being chained to a bed, but like having chains in your mind of what you think you can do, what you think is available to you. And then we get all the way to 6 where we start to see some control. So that is when some of that transactional nature would come of what we're really thinking about with human trafficking, of a pimp-controlled, trafficker-controlled situation where they are matching someone with someone that is buying sex, and then there is sex in exchange for something of value. So it's important for us to know, like, this is days, weeks, months, a long time of a relationship. And I think it's a lot of our responsibility, of those that are involved in vulnerable people's lives and children's lives, for us to know these things so that we can maybe start to see it number 3, because a lot of times once we get to 6, we're looking at a very different challenge than if we had addressed some of those needs and filled some of those needs when we were at number 3. Go ahead. So these are a couple indicators of sex trafficking. This is hard. Like, I cannot tell you a red flag of what someone that has experienced human trafficking is always going to have. Like, we are all different. Survivors are all different. And not everyone that has experienced exploitation is going to have a barcode on their wrist. Now, are some? Absolutely. That is going to be part of their story. Branding is going to be part of their story. Abortions are going to be part of their story. Having multiple hotel keys, multiple cell phones. But there is no, we talked about that earlier, like, all survivors look very different. There is no one indicator that I can tell you, but there are some that are significant and can be helpful for us to know. So we know signs of physical or sexual abuse are going to raise some flags. When we go back to that stages of grooming, we can, a lot of these would fall into some of those stages. And so, because we want to serve people before they are at that stage 6, right? We don't want people to have to experience exploitation to then get support and get help. We want to support them at stage 4 or stage 5 or stage 1. That would be great. So we know that if an individual is not in control of their own documentation or their own possessions or things like that, that is going to raise some red flags. If an individual is never allowed to be alone, so it seems that someone is controlling them, or that they cannot make their own decisions. Reluctance to make eye contact, avoid social interaction. But I would say one of the biggest things is instances where there are multiple STIs and multiple STDs, pregnancies, and that is where, like, our local pregnancy care centers really matter in the ways that we are caring for women and vulnerable women in particular. But these are a couple of indicators. I will tell you that Facebook will tell you that if there is a styrofoam, like, cup on your door that's upside down in yellow and brown, that means that, like, you're being watched or that you're going to be trafficked. I don't know that to be true. Like, just to be in full transparency. So we want to be on guard for things like that, because it doesn't do actual survivors service when we make these sort of generalizations. So you can go ahead. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about this, of, like, what are some identification challenges. We know that a big part of that is that the experience of what survivors experience is not aligned with what we see in the media, that individuals, for the most part, are not attempting to run away from their trafficker. We talked about those phases of grooming, that there is a loyalty to someone that met their needs, maybe for the first time ever, that they don't want to be labeled as a victim. You've heard that I've been pretty intentional of using language of survivor instead of victim. Obviously, there is a time and a place to use that language. We need our law enforcement to use that language. We need lawyers to use that language. But I do not have to use that language. We know that for some, when we're talking about children in particular, there might not be a safe place to land with this information. And that's one of the biggest things that we can do, is be a safe place for children, so that if a child does want to disclose, or as we are being a safe place, we are seeing some of these red flags or these indicators, that we can show up in that capacity. Go ahead. So this talks a little bit about, this gets a little bit into kind of what I have seen in serving directly with survivors, and what we do with survivors, and with the understanding that we cannot expect that survivors are going to tell us about their victimization. And if you think about it, you're like, yeah, I don't want to tell a stranger victim advocate that I met in the middle of the night about every bad thing that's ever happened to me. And so we follow the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which some of you might be familiar with. Essentially, it's the idea that we cannot expect someone to understand or identify the trauma or the complexities of what they have navigated or what they are navigating if they don't know where they're going to sleep. They don't know what they're going to eat, and they don't have medical care and safe clothing to wear. And so that is where a lot of the work is needed is to meet those basic needs, which then allow for us to do some more of the work. Like, counseling matters so much for survivors of trauma, and mentorship matters so much for survivors of trauma, but none of that can happen if those basic needs are not met. Go ahead. So the natural kind of question when we're talking about human trafficking is like, okay, that's really scary. Like, how do I protect myself and the people that I love and care about? Obviously, like, you all are doing something that really matters in regards to educating yourselves and others about the legitimacy of what is going on. We want to be intentional about like who we are around, what we are doing. We want to confide in trusted adults and confide in law enforcement, but where we're going to camp out and spend a lot of our time today is practicing safe internet usage. And so we know that the vast majority of survivors are meeting their unhealthy partner, trafficker, or abuser online before they are meeting them in person, if they even ever meet them in person. Sometimes exploitation can happen only over. So we're going to spend the next little bit of chunk of time talking about safe internet usage and some tangible ways that we can practice that, not only for ourselves, but also for other adults and children that are in our lives. Go ahead. So this is a really scary statistic that we know that, so online enticement is essentially like sexual online enticement of individuals asking for sexual content online. And so there was a significant increase in like 2020 when everybody was home. And then we were curious about if some of that was going to level out, and it did not. So there has only been an increase. Now there also is some really, really valid concerns regarding about where like artificial intelligence lives and all of that. That is like so not my lane and not what we're going to talk about. There are like plenty of people that are talking about that are doing really good things. That is not my thing. So I'm not leaving that out of this conversation. Well, I am leaving that out of this conversation, but I'm just not touching it because I'm not an expert in it. So you can go ahead to the next thing. So a couple of social media statistics. A lot of us like know this in our brain, but it's helpful for us to like see numbers in front of our heads sometimes about the number of people that are on the apps that are a lot of us are on. The amount of hours that are being spent on social media is like astronomical. And so we need to know what is going on the internet. And for us to let children in particular just be on the internet and use social media and us not to educate ourselves, to be frank, is irresponsible and unhealthy. And is risking the safety of what that looks like. One of the scarier social medias that there is Snapchat, which is a little bit ironic because my mom is here. And when I was in middle school, I had a Snapchat, and then she went to a youth group like info session and came home and she said, "Do you have Snapchat on your phone?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Delete it right now." And so of course I did because I follow the rules. But my friends still had it, and I thought it was like super annoying that I had to delete it. And now here I am like talking about how bad Snapchat is. So there's that. But Snapchat is just one of the social media platforms that makes this promise that if you send a picture, that picture is deleted and no one else can see it. To be fair, like, that's just a lie. Like, in the internet, like, you really can't delete things. Like, things stay around and people can exploit it. I mean, even someone that's not smart on the internet can just take a picture of your picture. Like, it's not even, don't even have to be that fancy. But then the powers that be, nothing is ever deleted. So, go ahead. So kind of on top of this same conversation, and Snapchat kind of led us into that, in regards to teenagers sending explicit sexual content, so what teenagers would call nudes, we know that has significantly increased and is continuing to increase. There is an interesting part of the law, again, I'm not a lawyer, but this is an important part of the law, that even a child sending an explicit image to another child, in our legal definition, that is considered child pornography, and that is against the law. in the United States. Now, are we seeing that being prosecuted? No. But it is a significant reality that even if it is self-produced, that is considered child pornography. Now, it's a whole different conversation when we're talking about a child sending explicit information to an adult, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But even when we are talking about children in relationship with each other, there is inherent risk. Not only is it just not safe and not healthy sexuality, it also is like against the law. So we know that this is like rapidly increasing, that 1 in 5 girls are sending explicit images before they turn 18, 1 in 10 boys. That feels like transparently like very low. This is people that have disclosed. So we've got to think that that is way more. We know that many kids have more than one social media account, and so they probably have one social media account that their parents are allowed to see, and one social media account that their parents aren't allowed to see. So not only, yes, we want to know about that because it could be explicit, but also that makes them at risk for weirdos to see that, and it's clear, like, only kids follow this, so I'm gonna follow this too, because that's where they're actually posting what is going on. So, you can go ahead to the next slide. So a couple of, so I do, and we'll get to this slide in a minute, I do have a QR code that talks like specifically about like iPhone or Android phones, about like what can be done on our phones, but mainly what can be done on children's phones and how we can protect children. We also have an interactive online internet safety training, say that 5 times fast, that you can take in like 15-minute increments that walk you through safe ways to talk about internet usage and how to do that, whether it's in your family's lives or the lives of someone else. So those QR codes are out like on a little table out there, and it is more condensed and less information all at once, like what is happening right now, that can be really helpful if you're looking for a very tangible step to keep people safe. So a lot of these things you probably know, that we want to avoid putting our private information on social media. We want to have private accounts. We want to be careful about telling people where we are and at what time we are there, specifically when we are with children, because we know that there are people that are in inappropriate relationships with children, and when they know where those children are, the risks are significantly higher. And so we always have ways to engage in additional privacy settings and things to that extent. Again, those QR codes will go, and even those videos will go more into all that with people that are experts. It also tells a really impactful story of one of my really good friends, who she experienced sexual exploitation first by meeting someone online, and she talks about what that stages of grooming looked like for her, and then is able to use some of her lived experience in educating us of how to prevent that for the people that we care about. Go ahead. So there is this new word that you may or may not have heard. We've really only been using this word since 2023. It's this word called sextortion. And so it is a new type of crime, because there are new types of crime as media is growing and internet is growing. And it is a crime that happens online when an adult convinces a person under the age of 18 to share sexual pictures or perform sexual acts on a webcam. And so this is when an adult convinces someone under the age of 18 to produce sexual content. And what we are seeing that is happening with sextortion is, one, that in and of itself is against the law. Like an adult looking for sexual content, whether it is in person or on the internet from a minor, against the law, period. End of story. What is happening with sextortion is that an adult is asking a minor for that content, and then they are using that content to further exploit the child. So they're saying things such as, I have this content. If you do not send me $5,000 in the next 3 hours, I'm going to share it with your whole school. Or I have this content. If you do not do X, Y, and Z sexual content in the next 24 hours, I'm going to share this with, I'm going to share this with your entire football team, or I'm going to share this with your parents. And you can imagine that is very motivating for an adult or for a child to find that money to increase. And this increases these levels of control and kind of put the gas on those stages of grooming that we're seeing. It's very, very scary. We are seeing it a lot in like middle to upper class teenage boys, specifically on like gaming devices. And so, because there's lots of chat rooms on like an Xbox or a PlayStation or stuff like that. And so a older male would maybe cosplay as a younger female and ask for sexual content from a teenage boy, obtain that sexual content, and then exploit that. And there has been a significant rise in this, and also a significant rise of suicide that is coming alongside this, of the amount of shame that someone is experiencing with the threat of this being shared is causing extreme mental health trauma. So very, very scary, and something that we need to know about. Go ahead. So a couple of sextortion predator red flags. A lot of this goes along the same lines as the red flags we're going to use for individuals that we want to practice safe internet usage. Is we really only want to be talking about people whose like faces we've seen in person. Like, I'm not going to be personally not going to be friends with somebody on Facebook if I have not met them in person and I know who they are. When an individual constantly has like new profiles, like, oh, sorry, that profile got taken down, but you can now talk to me on this profile. Huge red flags. When an individual is quickly moving from, hey, it's so nice to meet you, to, don't you want to get on the phone and go to this new different chat app that we can talk about over here? That's going to be a huge red flag. And you can imagine that all of these things are targeting children in particular that are lonely, right? That have social needs that are not being met. And so when an individual is showing them attention, it is not, it totally makes sense that they would want that attention. That is totally normal in stages of development. And so one of the really big ways that we can care for children and be a part of some of this prevention work is being in the lives of children and showing up, and kids doing things that are not online and being stimulated by things that are not online, because this whole sextortion thing is extremely scary. Go ahead to the next. So another one of the things we can do, and I would say one of the most urgent things that we can do, is engage kids in hard conversations. And so engage in talking about the safety of their body, about what safety in their body feels like, about what safety at large feels like, that they are in charge of their body, about ways that your family has decided to use the internet. I've worked with families that have made like an internet usage covenant, and all the family buys into that. And so if we are asking children to spend an hour on social media a day, like that means we have to spend an hour on social media a day, which can be a hard sell for us, but we have to model that and model what that looks like. We have to encourage that these are ongoing conversations, that it is fair for children to be curious about their bodies and curious about sex and curious about the internet, and that the safe people in their life should be a safe place to land. One of the things that I have found extremely helpful, I do a version of this internet safety training directly to middle school and high school students a couple times a year. And one of the questions that I will regularly ask them is, if you were teaching your younger sibling about the internet, how would you do that? And like their younger siblings aren't allowed to be on any of the apps that they are on, like none of them. They're like, well, they can't be on Roblox, they can't be on TikTok, they can't be on all of these things. And I mean, that's giving us information, right? Like if we are trying to protect our younger siblings from what that looks like, we need to be safe for what that looks like. So that is a really valuable tool that I have used to provide some agency and provide some leadership in some of this discussion. so that we can start having effective ways to have conversations about boundaries, not only with our bodies, but also about the internet and other relationships that we're a part of. Go to the next slide. So these are those QR cards I was talking about. I also have them on the thing in the back so you can take them with you. But this is like a tangible action step of something that we can do for the children that are in our life, for sharing with the parents that are in our life about what we can do with our phones, with our iPads, all that sort of fun stuff. You can go ahead. So now we get to the anti-trafficking part. So what is One More Child? What is Parker tangibly doing for survivors? So we've clearly communicated that there is a need for services, that human trafficking is happening in our world, in our country, in our state, in our county, all that sort of thing. So what is One More Child doing? The caveat of what I have all of this is that I don't live here. And so One More Child does not live here. I live in the Triangle. We're going to get to some of the work that is happening in Ashe County, but I do want to share with you about what we're doing, about what I do day to day, and about the model that One More Child has built that I really believe in and how we're serving survivors. Go ahead. So we provide a 24/7, 365-day anti-trafficking mobile team. And so what that means is that we are available to our clients and to our partners all of those times. Now, that does not mean that Parker is available all of that time. It means that members of our team are available all of those times. Because as I'm sure all of you guys know, crisis very rarely happens like within business hours. It's lovely if it does, but it very rarely does. And so we want to be creative in the ways that we're serving survivors and actually meet the needs that are present and not tell them that their needs need to look like what we want them to. Go ahead. So we have a multidisciplinary team, which means we have multiple different disciplines on our mobile team with a heart to fill in the gaps in services. So there are parts of North Carolina, I talked about that North Carolina is behind on some things. There are parts of North Carolina service provision that are working really well, and we want to partner with those things that already exist to identify gaps of whatever that is. And part of what that is that 24/7 crisis intervention of knowing that a lot of agencies only have capacity to operate within certain time periods. And so what does it look like for us to be that in between? Another piece of that is that our services are completely free and mobile. So a gigantic barrier for services for the vast majority of our clients is transportation. And so most of our clients are experiencing some type of poverty. And so transportation is not the top of their priority list. And so what that looks like for us is that we are going to our clients and not expecting them to come to us. And so we are meeting in coffee shops, in parks, in houses when it's safe, and figuring out what the needs of our clients are in creative ways. Go ahead. So the two main parts of how we provide direct services in North Carolina is through advocates, which is similar to case management. That might be some language that you're more familiar with. So we are assessing the needs of our clients regularly, figuring out what are short-term and long-term goals about what self-sufficiency looks like. Because as much as I love my job, I want to work myself out of a job. Like the goal would be that no one would be in need of anti-trafficking services. And so we want to be empowering our clients to live lives without us, not live lives that are reliant on other sorts of social services. I talked a little bit about therapy and trauma therapy. That is not my expertise, and so that's why I don't live in that a lot. But clinicians and behavioral health clinicians are part of our multidisciplinary team. Now, like we talked about with that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they are not usually a part of day one. That we have found it most effective for some of those basic needs to be met, and then us to come in and start doing some of that trauma therapy. We talked about this in the indicators and vulnerabilities, but for a lot of the clients that we're serving, this human trafficking or sexual exploitation is not the first trauma that they have endured. And it might not even be like the worst trauma that they endured. And so there is a lot of work to be done in addressing trauma and figuring out what successful life looks like moving forward. And so our clinicians do individualized treatment plans with trauma-focused therapy. They also do psychoeducation in the community and psychoeducation for the people that are a part of our clients' lives. So their parents that might be a part of their lives, their children that might be a part of their lives, their support person, whether that's a friend or a pastor or things like that, in strapping them with some knowledge about what trauma looks like and how to best serve survivors of trauma, so that they're not learning all these skills in therapy and then going back to environments that are not healthy. Go ahead to the next slide. So this speaks a little bit to tangibly what some of those services look like. So we meet some of those tangible needs, going back to that, those stages of grooming, provide some justice assistance, whether the client is the victim or the defendant, because we know sometimes that is a part of their story, providing a lot of information referrals about services that already exist in the area, and then get to do things like this, of providing education and training and outreach within the community to individuals that are working directly with survivors and people at large. Go to the next slide. So this is really, really important. So you've just learned about human trafficking, like hopefully you're gonna go learn more. All that stuff is great. There are a couple of like tangible steps. If you are in a situation where you believe you are working with someone or you suspected that someone is experiencing, whether like that is human trafficking, sexual harm, physical abuse, etc. First of all, if it is a child, everyone in North Carolina is a mandated reporter. And so if you are informed that a child abuse is occurring, we have a responsibility to report that to DSS. If you are working with a survivor of human trafficking that is interested in assistance, you can call the human trafficking hotline. Now, if you believe that you or the person that you're working with is in immediate danger, you need to call 911 or call law enforcement. So the DSS child report line matters. The human trafficking hotline matters. We have a 24/7 number that matters, but we are not law enforcement. And so if anybody is in immediate danger, we need to loop in law enforcement. And hopefully, if you were to call the DSS hotline or the human trafficking hotline and they assessed that you are in immediate danger, they would tell you to call 911. But we don't want to delay that if we don't have to. Go to the next slide. Okay, so this is my information. I'm gonna ask Emily to come up and talk a little bit about, so I shared that, all of this information really, really matters. And like, if there is not an action step, if there is not something for us to do to serve people, I think that's a missing piece. And so I want you to know about what is happening in your county and who is serving the people of your county and ways that you can put this information into action. So, Emily, come on. Yeah.
Well, that's really hard to follow up.
Oh, gosh.
I'm telling you that I'm not that good. I do this every once in a while, so everybody bear with me. But I'm Emily Hale, and I work for a Safe Home for Everyone here in the county. We are the sole domestic violence and sexual assault agency for our county. There's actually only 2 of us, but we work really hard to provide services to everybody that we possibly can. We also have a 24-hour crisis line. So any time of the day, Christmas Day, whatever it may be, one of us is going to be available to assist anybody that is in need. A couple things that we do here in the county to help people out is we do have emergency housing. We have upped from 2 to 4 emergency housing units here in the county. Some of those might be a townhome or an apartment or just a home by itself, but we only put one family in there at a time. We don't have the manpower or the funds to have a shelter, so that is our best alternative to that. And it has a great appeal. You don't see that a lot, but you're not housing multiple families all together with same traumas or different traumas and trying to help them get back on the right track when they're with a bunch of people that are experiencing those same things. So we've seen a lot of great things come out of the scattered site model. We also do short-term crisis intervention and counseling support. So if somebody comes in and they are coming out of a situation and they just need to talk to somebody, get their next steps going, we're able to work with them through that, and then also refer them to services that are already here in the county that can also help them. And we don't just say, okay, well, here's a phone number, call it, good luck. We try to stay with them if they're willing for us to be there for that phone call to make sure that that call is helpful, and if it's not helpful, to point them in a different direction. We are a small county. Our resources are sometimes very, very low. So it helps when all of our community partners kind of come together and know, okay, this is what we're able to help with, this is not what we're able to help with, to kind of better serve all of our clients. And that way they also know, okay, this is actually in the county and this is in the county. And a lot of people, before I took this job, I had no clue what all this county offered. So we try to push them towards resources that could really be helpful to them. We also do support group once a month. We have tried to have support group probably the last year. In the last year, we have successfully had one. We cannot encourage people enough that are in these situations to come to support group. I don't know, that's scary. That can just be a scary thing. It's a small county again, everybody knows everybody. You go sit down at a support group and right there's your neighbor. That can be very traumatizing within itself. So we're trying to come up with a way to do that without putting our clients in that position of having to be all in the same space. So we have started doing a lot of referrals to Jody Province, which is a local counseling agency here. So that way they can get more individualized therapy. But again, we're still really trying with the support group. It's just not happening for us at the moment. A couple other things, like you had mentioned, is the awareness, just trying to get out into the community and let people know that we're here and what we can do. A lot of people don't know about us. I hear all the time, what's a safe home? Where's the safe home? What is that? So since I have been on, that's been one of my big goals, is coming into the program, is trying to push that information out there. Please don't listen to the radio, because if you do, I'm on there 3 times a day, trying to get this information out to people. And if you know me, this is not my thing. I'm profusely sweating. So So I'm really trying to push the information out there. We recently, oh gosh, Donna, 4 billboards. We have 4 billboards now. And the billboards and the radio seem to be helping us the most in getting it out there. So if you know of anybody, or if you work for anybody that would like for us to just come out and give a 10-minute little, hey, we're here. We're really just trying to get out into the community so we can help those clients. And we also help with human trafficking, but we're not getting a lot of those reports. So most of everything that's coming to us is domestic violence and sexual assault. And unfortunately, it is a huge part of our community. And I hate to say that, but it's just the truth. Right now, so as of June 1 of last year, we have served 71 adults in the county, which doesn't sound like a lot, but we're very little. So I'm very proud of that number. And then 80 children have been helped in the last year, just through our program. So that kind of puts it a little bit into perspective of how much is in the county, unfortunately. And in the last year, we have performed over 2,100 services between 2 advocates. So we're really trying to be there for our community and get that information out. So, and I also have some stuff out there. My business cards are out there. Grab some goodies. But I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions for my little spill that could never follow up? Beautiful Parker over here. But I'll be out back, so if anybody does come up with a question, just please grab me. And thank you guys for letting me be here today. I really appreciate it.
That was great. Thanks. Okay, any other questions? I'll also be here because sometimes it's awkward to ask a question in front of everybody. But does anybody have any questions for the group? That's great. I mean, I think that's I covered it. There are no questions necessary. Okay, am I just wrapping up? Am I wrapping up? Yeah, you can pray. Thanks.
Okay, let's close in prayer. You are a great big God. We praise you and we love you and we thank you for loving us. And as we've been meeting here tonight, we know that there are people in trouble. And we know that you just ask us to do what we can. So I pray that from these words of wisdom that we've heard from these ladies tonight, that you will just encourage our spirits, quicken our hearts, help us to be good listeners. And God, if there's anything that we can do, please make it evident to us. Be with Emily and Parker and the work that they do, Father. And we just pray that you will multiply their needs, quicken their hearts, and just help them in the avenues that they pursue and the people that they meet. Bless us now as we go home tonight. Pray us to have a good night's rest and wake up refreshed in the morning to serve you more. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, darling.
Good. Wonderful. I was kind of sweaty too.
Yeah, it gets hot right there.
Yeah, it does. You need a fan.
It's the spirit. It's just
Yeah.
right there.
Oh, okay.
I want y'all to read.